justification for going to war, I think, has to address what's morally most problematic about war, namely that it necessarily involves killing and injuring people. My view is that violence in general, and killing people in particular, is just only when the victims have made themselves liable to be attacked or killed, or made themselves liable to the harms that we inflict on them through violence. This is basically registering agreement with the claims that David has been making. Now, they're liable to be harmed in a certain way when they've forfeited their right not to be harmed in that way, so that when our justification for harming somebody is that that person is liable to be harmed in this way, we're not wronging that person when we harm him in that way. People normally become liable to defensive harm, in my view, by being morally responsible for a threat of wrongful harm to others. Now, the reason why I use the word just here is that I'm talking about something more than mere permissibility. I'm actually talking about a justification that appeals to considerations of justice. Defensive harming, I think, is a specific area of justice, like retributive justice or corrective justice or commutative justice or whatever. It's a specific area of justice that's concerned with the ex ante distribution of unavoidable harms. And my view is that when possible, harms that are unavoidable should, as a matter of justice, go to those people who, through their own wrongful action, have made it inevitable that someone has got to be harmed. Now, in this understanding about the relation between justice and liability and so on, there's a just cause for war is an aim that may permissibly be pursued by means of war because those warred against have made themselves liable to be attacked militarily as a means of achieving some aim, usually a wrong for which those individuals are responsible. So in particular, there's a just cause for defensive war, on my view, when the people warred against are themselves morally responsible for a threat of wrongful harm that's sufficiently grave to make them liable to be killed or injured as a means of preventing that wrongful harm. Now, of course, war normally involves killing a lot of people. So for there to be a just cause for war, there have to be many people who are liable to be killed as a means of preventing the wrong for which they're responsible. Let me say a little bit more about that. If the goal of a war can't be achieved by intentionally making war only against people who are liable to be attacked, if it can be achieved only by making war against people who have not made themselves liable to attack, that is, if it involves attacking people who are innocent in what I take to be the relevant sense here, then the goal that one is pursuing by means of war can't be a just cause for war, as I understand that notion. The goal may be a good goal. It may even be a just goal. It might be a goal that can justifiably be pursued by means that involve the infliction of lesser harms than are inflicted through war. So it might be a just cause for various other kinds of action. But if the people aren't liable to be militarily attacked and killed, then you don't have a just cause for war, as I'm understanding the notion of just cause here. So, on my view, there can be a just cause for war only if there are enough people who are liable to be killed or injured to make the use of military means potentially proportionate in relation to the liability of those people who are attacked. If the wrong one is threatened with is insufficiently serious, then those who threaten it may not be liable to be killed, though they may be liable to lesser forms of harmful action. Now, here's an example. is not meant to be actually a focus on the actual case. Let's just take a case of a war that was arguably disproportionate in this kind of special sense that I have in mind here, the Falklands War. There were 1,800 inhabitants of the Falklands Islands. That was roughly the number of Argentine casualties caused by Britain's war. Imagine, though, that the war, in order to have preserved British sovereignty over the Falklands Islands, would have required the killing of 100,000 Argentine combatants. Just making this up, of course. I would want to claim that protecting the independence of the way of life of the 1,800 Falklands Islanders would not have been sufficient to make 100,000 Argentine combatants liable to be killed. So if that war had required killing that many combatants on the other side, I'm not talking about, killing innocent people as a side effect here. I'm actually talking about killing people who would be fighting for unjust aims. I think there wouldn't have been a just cause for war in that case, though there would have been a just cause. That is, I think Britain had a just cause for some kind of action there. So what I'm suggesting here, though, is that just cause and liability and a certain notion of proportionality are conceptually interrelated. Now, this leads to some problems that I'll mention in a minute, but let me also note here that the appeal to the claim that one has a just cause for war, and therefore that one's war can be just in that the people against whom one is fighting won't be wronged by the harms that one inflicts on them. In addition to that form of justification, there are other possible forms of justification for the resort to war. So I don't think that just wars, in principle, are the only types of war that can be permissibly fought. There's another kind of justification, which is a justification for harming people, which is the justification of necessity or lesser evil. This is a form of justification that we have to appeal to when we are harming people who are innocent, that is, people who are not liable to be attacked. And this happens in war. So the form of justification here is a very familiar one. Whenever there really is a moral justification for killing or injuring innocent bystanders as a side effect of military action in war, that justification is going to be a lesser evil or necessity justification. It's not going to appeal to any claims about liability on the part of the victims. We acknowledge we're going to be wronging them. We're going to be infringing their rights. But sometimes we concede that that can be permissible unless we are absolutists. What this means is that, in principle, there could be a war that it would be morally permissible to fight. It could be a justified war, though it wouldn't be a just war. It wouldn't have a just cause. We would be wronging the people we would be fighting against. The only historical example that I can think of that approximates that kind of case is the Winter War between the Soviet Union and Finland. This was I don't want to say that I think that the Soviet Union's war actually was a justified war. I'm just suggesting that this is a near case. Anyway, the Soviet Union wanted to borrow a bit of Finnish territory for the defense of Leningrad against the Nazis, and the Finns refused. The Soviet Union offered an exchange of territory so that the Finns would get more Soviet territory than the Soviets would take of Finnish territory, and the Finns refused. Suppose we think that the Finns were permitted to refuse. I think they probably were. Suppose we then thought also that the Soviet Union had grounds of necessity or lesser evil. They were thinking that by fighting on Finnish territory, they might be able to save the lives of millions of innocent people in Leningrad from Nazi attack. If we change some of the facts of the case, we might have an example there where the Finns were justified in resisting, the Soviets were justified in attacking, but they certainly didn't have a just cause. There was nothing, in my sense, of just cause. There's nothing that the Finns had done to make them liable to be attacked and killed by the Soviet Union. Now, there's a general problem about national defense that's raised by this understanding of just cause that I'm presenting to you today. That was developed extensively in David's book, War and Self-Defense, which is raised by the example that I gave a moment ago of the Falklands War. What happens when an unjust aggressor threatens only lesser values? Nobody had any thought that the Argentine military was going to kill anybody on the Falklands Islands. There was really initially only a threat to the sovereignty of those islands. You know, who was going to be the sovereign over the 1,800 people on the islands, the British or Argentina? Now, of course, once Britain decided to defend the islands by military means, then the Argentine forces posed a different kind of threat. But initially, they may have posed only a threat to this British sovereignty over the Falklands Islands. And actually, what's surprising, if you think about it, is that a lot of wars look like that initially. That is, you're familiar with the idea that aggressors claim to love peace. And of course, there's a sense in which that's true. They'd much rather get what they want without having to go to war. So they would like to get what they want by peaceful means. That is, you just submit to them and give them what they want. Very often, what aggressors want are things like natural resources, a bit of territory, some political control over other people's affairs, that kind of thing. They don't necessarily want to kill anybody or harm anybody physically or perpetrate violence against anybody. They would happily not hurt anybody if you just give them what they want. There is then this question of how you can justify killing large numbers of people, particularly when these people are usually young people who are fighting under duress and in conditions of epistemic limitation, where they don't know all the facts and so on. How it can be justifiable to kill a very large number of these people in order to defend these lesser values or lesser rights, rights of territorial integrity, political independence, rights over natural resources, and so on. I'm not going to actually pursue that question. I think there's a lot that can be said in defense of war, in defense against this kind of lesser aggression that's backed by a conditional threat to kill people if you engage in resistance. I actually think there's a lot that can be said there, but I'm not going to say it today. The reason I bring it up is just to flag a problem that arises for those of us who accept the kind of conception of just war and just cause for war for which David and I have presented a case today. For David, this problem pushes him closer towards a contingent form of pacifism. For me, I dig in my heels and try to find good arguments for resistance. But I'm not going to try to give you those today. What Ed Barrett asked me to focus on today was something that David mentioned briefly in his talk, and that is that the view of just cause that I've just sketched, I think really entails a radical revision of the in bello morality of war. It entails the idea that there's an asymmetry in war between those who fight on behalf of a just cause and those who fight without a just cause. Because what we're asking here about in bello morality is what justifies soldiers